And we are live. JT here. Welcome to The Huddle. The Huddle is where I sit down with successful people from the world of sport and coaching. It's to learn more about their journey to greatness. Why do I have these conversations? Because success always leaves clues. I want to thank you. I want to thank you whether you are tuning in live as we stream into our Facebook community, whether you are watching the replay on YouTube or on Facebook, or whether you're listening to the audio on the podcast. Thank you so much for being here with me and my special guest today. And as I'd like to remind you every week in the huddle, the mind is like a parachute. It works best when it's wide open. So my challenge to you is to go all in on this conversation, to remove any distractions and to just open up your mind. And I guarantee you, you will gain a valuable nugget of wisdom that will not only help you succeed in sport, but in the game of life. I've been looking forward to my conversation with my special guest today. As with many of these conversations in the huddle, you know, I have these great conversations offline, and really the huddle is about, you know, inviting you in to actually hearing these conversations that happen offline so that you can reach your next level of greatness. My guest in the huddle today is a Princeton University Hockey alum. She is a leadership mindset coach with elite high performance, and most importantly, just an amazing human being and great friend. My guest in the huddle today is MJ Jennings. How are you today, Coach?
I am great, JT. Very, very grateful to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. So I just think of how many great conversations we've had up to this point, just enthused that we get to share some of it with our community.
Absolutely. Me too.
So before we get started, MJ, one of the things that I often remind myself is to count my blessings. And as we've talked about, it's a daily practice. Some days are easier than others, but it's important to count our blessings. So I just want to, and I believe actually first and foremost that the biggest blessing that we can give anyone is our time and energy. So thank you so much for being able to invest some of your time and energy into being here with me in our community again.
Thank you so much. And right back at you. I agree. You know what? We actually, every morning on the way to daycare and school, we have this practice with the boys where we have them say, you know, what are you grateful for today? What are you grateful for this morning? And again, just to try to orient the mind to look at, you know, what is positive? What is there to be grateful for? So I love that.
So MJ, I'm curious, one of the first things I like to do in the huddle is to remind people that life is a game and games are supposed to be fun. I had a coaching colleague that once said, we all have our quirks. We all have those things that make us unique, that are different, that really just make us who we are. So I'm curious, is there an interesting fact, as I said, some call it a quirk, that maybe a lot of people don't know about you that you'd be open to sharing with our community?
Well, that is interesting. A quirk. I'm not sure about a quirk, but maybe something that is an interest aside from the professional side of things. Like I'm really into music. So I picked up a guitar when I went away to university and kind of self-taught myself over the course of many years. And when I got back from school, I did a few open mics. And when I was at school, I did one or two in New York City, which was a lot of fun. So not a quirk, but I would say I definitely have like an ongoing underlying level of passion for music.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I love that creative side. And it's interesting that you share that because I realize how many high performers actually do have a creative sort of interest, passion, hobby. And it's interesting how many of them flex that creative muscle a lot.
Yeah. And to be honest, it certainly is not flexed nearly as often since we've had kids. But as of late, I'm trying to make more conscious space for it because like you said, it's a good outlet. It's a good way to kind of find flow and get into more of a creative state by doing something away from work or raising children.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, MJ, you've played sport at a high level, you've coached at a high level, right? You've worked with high performers in many different aspects, right? Both on and off the ice. So I'm curious, sport has obviously played an important role for you in your life. I'm curious, is there a particular lesson that you've gotten from sport that you still find yourself applying to your life today?
Oh my God, so many. I don't even know if I could pick just one, but I would say, I think part of it is what's led me to this professional journey of working with people and helping them expand their self-awareness, right? And their intrinsic motivation is that sport taught me so much about myself. It gave me confidence. It gave me the ability to be a part of something bigger than myself. So sports kind of was a vehicle for me to learn and understand some of my core values. The biggest transition for me, and we've talked about this before, was moving away from being an athlete into that next chapter. So understanding my core values, but the shift was understanding how those values can be at play outside of my identity as an athlete, right? So one of the things that we've talked about is sports are amazing because it can be a vehicle for you to learn your value and self-worth, but it can at times be detrimental if it is the sole vehicle in which you see your value and self-worth. And there are elements of sport that really focus on the extrinsic motivation, right? Or the extrinsic validation. Like I am good because I score goals, because I have good stats, because I'm a starter, whatever that might be. And we really appreciate and enjoy that feedback, right? And it motivates us. But when we graduate from sport and we don't have a coach saying good job, or we don't have a statistics page to look at and be like, I did this, I did that. Sometimes people struggle to find that same sense of value and self-worth outside of that environment that's so full of external validation. So one example that I would use is I often talk about my transition from playing junior hockey to going to Princeton University. So I was from a small rural town in southwestern Ontario. Like when I was ready to take the SAT tests, I went to my high school and they were like, I don't think we have anything for that. Like they found like a dusty SAT practice book at the bottom of a drawer somewhere. So like there wasn't much set up to do that or to be successful in that next area. And I, for years, have used this analogy. It was like I went from being a big fish in a small pond to a small fish in a big pond. And I heard something the other day that I will now remember and it will stick with me. I didn't change size, right? So I wasn't like a big fish in a small pond to a small fish in a big pond. It's the same fish. Right. And I think for me, it just highlighted again that perception that I was in this small environment. I was gauging my worth, right, and my identity based on how I was perceived in the environment. I was big in a small space. And then I went to this larger environment, and in my mind, I shrunk. When really my abilities, my talent, my potential were the same here as they were there. And I think that's kind of the focal point. And what I'm so passionate about in my work now is helping people to see, like, you don't change in terms of who you are and what makes you you. And to be consistent in our perception of our abilities and our potential for growth, regardless of what environment we find ourselves in, right? Because for people who are purpose-driven, that's the goal. Like you start and you're just in your family. So you're in a really small pond, right? And then you enter the school situation and now your environment gets a bit bigger. And then you go to university and then you go into the business world. And then, at the end of that, maybe you have a grander plan for yourself where your impact's going to get bigger. So how do you stay confident in the fish that you are, regardless of the environment you find yourself in?
I love that. And again, you touched on so many great things, right? You talked about these ideas of, being clear with your values, right? The whole conversation around self-identity, self-worth. And what I really heard from you, that idea was we've all been sort of programmed to allow things outside of us to define us, right? And we've talked about this numerous times, right? I always go back to this report card syndrome, probably my background from education, right? Is this idea of a mark out of 100, right? Defines you as a student, right? Or the number as an athlete, many of us are athletes, the number on a scoreboard defines your worth, right? And then as we get older, it changes, right? The number of zeros in our bank account, the job title, and so on and so on. So I'm curious from your perspective, from you working with the high performers that you work with, right? From your lived experience, why is that something that many people struggle with, right? That allowing things outside of us to define who we are, or if we really want to go deeper, self-worth?
I think I wouldn't say it's necessarily anyone's fault. I think it's just like a missed rung in the development ladder. For think about it, you have a child, right? And when we're born, our brain's sole job is to protect us and keep us safe. And it does that by taking in everything that we see and assigning it as something that will bring us pleasure or something that will bring us pain, right? So we associate meaning to the things that are around us. So the challenge is, as parents, and I'm a parent too, right? Like you want your child to be confident and empowered. So you give them compliments, you give them words of assurance, and that's all great at that age. And the child sees that and it's like, this is amazing. This makes me feel safe and loved, and I want more of this. And then you go into a school environment. And again, like there's that natural desire to look for external acceptance and affirmation, whether it's friends or grades, or like for you and I, we got involved in sports and wow, this is great. I'm good at this. And people are telling me I'm good at this. And, so part of it, I think, is what we need to do as the adults in that situation from a young age is encourage them to be able to self-validate more, right? To be able to look at what they're doing and say, I did a good job. Like one small thing is, like my son, he's addicted to Lego right now. So he's always playing with Lego, and he actually has like this great creative mind, and he'll create these things. And one shift at times, rather than saying like, I'm proud of you, saying like, wow, you must be really proud of yourself, right? Like even little things like that, where you're encouraging people to acknowledge their own accomplishments, right? To consciously have their brain say, I did this well, rather than they said I did this well. So it's not to say external validation isn't needed. It is absolutely great. And it's nice to have it. The challenge is when people solely rely on that to define their worth. Then that's when, as they get older, right, they run into walls because there is that disconnect.
No, and such a great point, right? Like I love, like, what came up for me as you shared that is, I think of my own life. What could I do today to help empower my kids to be able to just speak kindly to themselves, right? To acknowledge them, like you said, for their gifts, their talents, and their abilities, and really do it in a simple way where it doesn't need to be anything like really big. It's just simple. Like you said, it could be simply playing with Lego, right? So I really like that idea.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So again, I always look back to, it's interesting. Some of these skills we talk about, right? Like, they referred to as soft skills, right? Where I look at these, social emotional learning skills, if we're looking at more from an academics standpoint, I look at these are just skills to be a great human being, right? To actually live a meaningful and purpose-driven life. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious from your perspective, what can we do? Because I feel like we're in a day and age where I think there's a different level of consciousness, awareness, an awakening that's been happening the last couple of years, right? Like, from your opinion, where do we even start to embed some of these ideas? Like what do you think is the low hanging fruit just to make these ideas, to normalize them?
Well, like I said, I think the idea of those small shifts in conversations, like if you're a coach or a teacher, right? When you're wanting to acknowledge someone for doing a good job, wording it in a way where it's like, you should be proud of yourself, right? Or like, you should be happy that you, like, whatever that might be. So framing it, not I am of you, but you are of yourself. Like that's an easy thing that I think coaches and teachers can start to do at times, is balance that out. And then another one is again, like for me, why I'm so passionate about coaching now with the perspective I have is that I do see sport as a vehicle for people to learn about themselves and their values and their strengths, but not only in the world of sport. Like, how can we leverage the things that kids learn about themselves through their engagement in sport to benefit that person, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years from now, right? Yeah. So an example is like when you talk about values. So most teams, right, they'll have the meeting at the beginning of the year. Let's talk about our values. What do those values look like? And sometimes people will limit, like, so for instance, we talked about this before, like I live by 4 things: the growth, impact, empathy, and optimism. So I'll give growth for an example. So sport helped me learn that growth was really important to me, because what did I love about my involvement in sport? I loved that I could constantly learn and I could constantly develop my skills and become better at what I was doing. And I enjoyed learning and growing and developing and actively seeking out opportunities. Once I transitioned out of sport, how can that value live on in different ways? Well, I love learning. I love being able to challenge myself in different ways, whether it's physically or mentally. So there are ways for me to fulfill that value and that value to live on, even if I'm not an athlete. So my question becomes, when we talk about growth with our athletes, right, or our team, if our team decides, okay, growth is really important to us. As a coach, how can I frame what that growth means to our team in terms of our like performance on the ice? Like I said, like getting faster, stronger, whatever. But can I also tie in an element where it talks about we value growth away from sport? Right? Like the idea of being a continuous learner. Like, can I challenge myself to grow in different ways? So as a coach, yes, we work in sport, but how can we leverage things like these values that we define for the kids to expand their understanding of how that value can be applied in their life, right? Whether it's at school or in friendships or even with their family, right? So it's that holistic approach to this will benefit us in sport, but let's plant the seed for how it also works elsewhere.
I love that. And again, probably speaking from, coming from an education background, what I really heard from you is like, what can you do to tie these in? So it's experiential learning, right? It's not you just telling them how, these are the values. It's actually allowing them to be able to actually practice them and immerse it within the things they love to do.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's absolutely it.
So I'm curious, why is it so important for people to be clear on what their values are? Like what is the benefit to someone that gains clarity around what actually drives them?
Well, I mean, yeah, when we look at, let's take motivation, for instance, right? Like when we can actually connect with our values, the things that mean a lot to us, aside from anything else, it does many things. It creates sustainable motivation. It creates clarity around your decision-making, right? We talk about that with coaches a lot. Like if you don't know your values as a coach and you walk into an environment where, again, lots of external pressures and, it can lead us down paths that we fundamentally don't believe are right. So our values can kind of serve as this moral compass to keep us doing things so our behaviors are in alignment with our beliefs, right? And I think if we don't get clear on that, it's really easy for our behaviors to be persuaded by a variety of things, whether it's pressure from parents or players or whatever it might be. So I think really it allows you to live in alignment with what matters the most to you, which at the end of the day, right? Like we do that exercise where you're sitting in a rocking chair on your porch, you're in your older age. Like when you reflect back, what mattered the most? What's the impact you had on people's lives? So being clear on your values allows you to live that out day by day versus being in that chair, looking back and being like, I wish I did this. I wish I did that. Right. So I know your word for this year is peace. Like, for me, being clear on your values ties into that. It creates confidence in your decision-making. It drives the behaviors in alignment with your values, and it allows you to be at peace with decisions you make, because at times living in alignment with your values it's going to require you to maybe make a decision that in the moment isn't super gratifying, right? It's how can you have that perspective of the long-term gain and understanding there may be some short-term pain that comes with that versus always pursuing that short-term gain, but then paying the price of that long-term pain or regret that can come with that.
I love how you talked about it just being kind of like a moral compass, right? Like being able to then drive the thoughts you have, which then drive the feelings, behaviors. And so it's a great reminder on how valuable those could be. And, it's interesting. You brought up that idea because I know, you mentioned my word for this year is peace. I have found in the last year that a lot of my growth has been learning to embrace the imperfection of life and the growth process and releasing this illusion of perfection. Right. So it's been a really interesting because I've realized how that can keep you stuck. Right. Because I think what people maybe fail to understand sometimes is that we live in a culture that everything looks shiny. Right. You were seeing everyone's highlight reels. And like I heard from you mention a number of times, the growth process is messy a lot of the time, but it's learning just to be able to, when you can come back to your core values and sort of just understand it's messy, it's not perfect, it's and learning to embrace that life just feels different.
Yeah. And it's tied to that growth mindset, right? It's that progress over perfection. Like you said, like when we're driven by our values are directly tied to process, right? Like if my value is growth, like that means on the day-to-day, I am looking for opportunities to grow. If my value, or if I'm focused on the results, right, then that's not a process. Like I heard a good thing on a podcast the other day. It was talking about goals, and goal setting is important. But if you think about like a sport team, right, everyone has the same goal. So if every team goes in, like, I want to win the championship, then the goal is not actually the deciding factor in your success. It's the process by which you accomplish that goal. And for me, values are what create clarity on what that process is supposed to look like. Right. And then when you're focused on that, often we know the desired goals will come as a result of that. But when you're only focused on the goals, like goals are fleeting. It's like, even if you win a championship, it happens in a day. So let's say you even accomplish it. Okay, you won. The next day, the next season starts. So if you're not clear on your process, that's where, like I said, people can make decisions that aren't in alignment with what matters to them. They lose that sense of fulfillment and peace because they're just trying to chase the next quick hit, right? So it's the sustainability piece is really big too.
Yeah, I love the word sustainability, right? It's like the ability to do it day in, day out, right? In pursuit of your goals. So I'm curious, from your lived experience, the values piece, was there a moment, like, have you always understood the importance of values, or was there kind of like this moment where you're like, oh my goodness, like I get it. Like there's kind of like this aha, where you're like, no, this is, yeah. Did you notice, or yeah, I'm curious.
So I would say from a young age, and I'm sure I inherited this from my mom. She is like the quintessential, like give you the shirt off her back type person. Okay. So from a young age, I always had this kind of level of empathy and concern for other people. And I think that's what kind of led me into leadership positions, whether it was student council or then through sports and then beyond that into coaching. But so I've always had this idea that like there's a bigger purpose for me to serve, right? And maybe some of that's rooted in spirituality too, but absolutely not crystal clear on my values whatsoever. Like there was a lot of years through my later teens and my early 20s where I was very much like seeking out the external validation, right? Like it was like, okay, like I need someone to tell me I'm great. And if I didn't have that, I felt shitty. So, and I think most people go through that in that period of time. So for me, where it became crystal clear was actually my mid-20s when I got involved in the mental performance coaching. I sought out a coach because again, a lot of people, they hit that wall, right? Where they feel like there's a disconnect and you're like, okay, I've got to figure stuff out. So it was then that I was able to get clarity on what my values were. And again, reflect on my experience as an athlete to help identify what some of those were. So the challenge was, okay, I was an athlete, but what did I love about sport? Right? Like, what was it that I really loved about sport? Was it like shooting a puck into a net? Was it passing? Was it that? Or like, was there more to it? So what could I take from my experience in sport that could then serve me, or that I could find in other pursuits after sport? And that's where like getting clarity around growth, impact, empathy, and optimism came. So I already spoke about growth, but like impact for me, again, that desire to have a positive impression on other people's lives. So when I was a teammate, like I cared about my teammates. I wanted them to do well. And it fueled me if I knew that I was able to positively impact their self-perception or their performance, right? So again, like that really mattered to me. And could I do that in life outside of sport? Well, of course, right? There's a lot of lives to impact in a variety of ways. And also even my own life. So understanding like the consequences of my words and my actions, being aware of the weight that they carry and how I can leverage them for my own performance and for the performance of others. So like I got clarity on impact. And again, all of those things, there's not an end goal to that, right? It's not, oh, now I'm aware of the consequences of my words and actions, or I'm aware of the weight that they carry. Like that's not something that just happens in a moment. That is like an active, continuous practice through life, right? And then empathy, again, being able to connect with others, have a genuine understanding and compassion for their experiences. I loved being able to do that in sport. How could I leverage that beyond sport? And not just in work life, but in my relationships with people, with my children, with my partner, with our extended family. So like there was just so much of that came out for me, but it does take conscious work. Right. And I think part of it is understanding the value in making the space to do it, the value that it carries in terms of like your life moving forward and your long-term plans or goals. But yeah, it's a conscious practice. But I think that's the key, is looking for it. Like, what did you love? If there was something that you were committed to and you're committed to for a long time, what did you really love about it? Because often like our passions are tied to our values. So if we have that positive emotional response, there's probably some sign that there's something here that does matter to who we are.
Yeah. It's what I really heard from you again was you're crystal clear on what your values are. And then I heard you kind of talk about alignment, because when you're crystal clear on your values, they can apply to any area of your life, right? I know you mentioned sport, right? When you're working with there, but also when you're working with your coaching clients, right? When you're working your relationships. And I find that, again, from my own experience, I know some of the disconnect in my life before was I was applying certain principles, certain values professionally, but they always weren't being applied at home. So again, you're kind of like, and again, everyone's doing the best they can based on their level of awareness, but I understood that that's where some of that pain was coming from in my life, was because it's almost like you were two different people, where I've learned that life has felt different and the quality of my life has improved as I have learned how to take some of those values that I was very clear on professionally, which has always felt a little bit easier to me, and learning how to apply them more in my personal life. And again, it's a daily practice, right? Some days I do it well, some days, there's room for improvement, but I have found that as I've learned to do that, the alignment's there. Life just feels different, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. It's a great point, right? And it kind of goes back to that idea of like the fish in the pond. Like if you are focused on you as the fish and your swimming abilities and growing, like you said, it's very common. And on the corporate side, we see it all the time. People have this disconnect between the person they are in the work pool or the work pond versus the person they are in the home pond. And like you said, there's always that level of internal conflict or disconnect or discontent that comes from trying to be two different people, right? So that's where, again, the goal or the values really does tie to that level of peace, because you are who you are. You believe strongly in what you believe in. You understand the value that carries for yourself and those around you. And that's how you show up, right?
Yeah, no, again, such a great point. And I love how you're tying it back to like, it does take conscious effort. So I'm curious, let's say someone like you've piqued interest in someone, right? And let's say someone, they want better, they're just not even sure where to start, because I think that that's where people, at least what I have found, where what trips people up is like the how, right? Just completely like, I don't even know where to start. Is there anything someone could do just to even get that process started to help them get some clarity around their values?
So one thing that's a pretty good practice is, as a starting point, is to just kind of rewrite your story. So from a young age, just write about your life, like what comes up, what is it that you've done, what is it that you've accomplished. And even just in doing that, when you go back and you reflect, like then you can look for themes, right? Like you can look for areas where maybe you had to make decisions, like what worked out, what maybe didn't. But it's really like, it allows us to objectively look at our life and look for those trends that have happened. The other thing is like, what are you proud of? Right? So if you reflect, like what are moments where you really felt proud of yourself, where you felt the most joyful? Because looking at that again, understanding like that sense of joy and accomplishment can be tied to what matters the most to us. But it can also sometimes shed light on some of that conditioned beliefs, right? Like if you write, what am I proud of? And it's just like a list of trophies and awards, then that might be a sign that, okay, like I'm really putting all of my value and worth on like external validation. Is there something more to it, right? So you challenge yourself to get a bit deeper. Maybe it's, what were you proud of that you weren't externally acknowledged for? So kind of asking yourself those questions. And then one of the early practices that we do with a lot of people as well, and we talked about this offline, like awareness comes before intelligence. So one big thing is actually to practice like what's called like an emotional pulse tool. So all that is like, as you're going through a day, if you experience a red flag emotion, so if you're angry or frustrated or upset or anxious, just stop, acknowledge the emotion, ask yourself like, what's happening that's making you feel that way, right? And then the third question is, what must be true about this situation for me to feel this way? So the point of that practice, and it's not an easy one, but the point of that practice is to make us aware of what we're feeling and what behavior that feeling is resulting in. Because again, most of us, we walk around, we feel emotions, right? I'm pissed off about something. Because I'm pissed off, that's going to impact my behavior, right? Now I'm going to be short-tempered or short-fused with my kids or my partner, or something happens in one meeting, I'm angry, I close that, I go right into the next one. And that feeling of anger then affects my behavior for the next meeting. So part of it is just taking ownership and understanding, just because we feel an emotion, that doesn't have to drive my behavior. I can feel an emotion, get curious as to why I feel it, and then reframe it so that I can go into the next scenario in that neutral state. I don't have to bring it with me. Right. So I think, because that's the big challenge, is just being aware of what we feel and why we feel. And then that will open the door for being able to get more intelligent about how we engage with those things.
What I really heard from you, it's with that greater awareness, what starts to happen is you start to become more responsive, more intentional with how you choose to act, as opposed to doing the easy thing, which is reacting, right? Allowing things outside of you to control your thoughts and actions.
Yes. Yes. Okay. And that is a crucial part, as you can see, like once you become aware of some of your habits, your tendencies, and then as you work to get clarity on your values, that's where that consciousness, right, and that deliberate practice comes into play. So for me, for instance, like I said, I mean, I have a 2 and a 4-year-old at home, and do they test my patience sometimes? Absolutely. Right. And it's in those moments, like being able to sense, okay, I'm frustrated, right? But what's going to be best for their growth and development? If one of my core values is impact, like I want to have a positive impact on their development, then I can question that emotion in the moment, understand where it's coming from. So it's not denying your emotions, because that doesn't work either. It's acknowledging it, understanding why I feel that way, but then taking a pause and saying, okay, Now back to my values. Like what do I need to do in this moment that aligns with my values? Because then if I act in alignment with my values, that's going to create a positive emotion for me and I'm going to feel better. If I'm angry and I act out of alignment with my values, then I come back to the table and now I'm more frustrated with myself or disappointed in myself because I didn't act the way that I would have liked to. So it's just kind of empowering yourself to have a little more conscious control over your behaviors.
I love the simplicity of it. And I love how you keep reminding us it's a daily practice. And, for me, I know how transformative it's been because, in my own journey, leaving my safe and comfortable world of sport or and coaching and teaching, it forced me to go to some uncomfortable places, right? Challenge a lot of doubts, worries, insecurities, old limiting beliefs. And what I've really found is that it really can be simple. And again, I said it's embracing the imperfection, but I've learned that simple things. So for example, just giving something tangible, I was unaware at the time of how my self-image as a parent was, right? Like just, it was not very empowering. And it's okay. Like I had to go through that to be where I'm at today. But what I've learned is it's those simple moments where I make certain decisions that actually allow me to become a more calm and confident parent. For example, making the decision that I don't deal with anything in the morning until I drop my kids off to school. Even last night, this idea, as much as I wanted to go downstairs and unplug and just, decompress, my daughter asked, can we cuddle? Okay, who's the dad I want to be? Am I the dad that's going to run downstairs and just kind of go in my own world? Or am I the kind of dad that's going to sit there and cuddle with my daughter for a couple minutes? So that's what's really resonated with me, is that it's these simple everyday actions that slowly strengthen those muscles, and those different decisions start to change who you believe you are, right? Or who you think you are. And for me, that has been, I don't know, it's been a very freeing exercise and loving seeing just the results that happen from it.
Yeah. And that just made me think too, like you said, it's strengthening the muscles. So like if you think of your brain as a muscle, right? Like it has been designed to function in a certain way for a long time. So once you start to become aware of this, right? And there's maybe things you do that you'd like to change. Part of it is having compassion with yourself, right? And again, that progress over perfection. Because if you think about it like a muscle, like I don't walk into the gym and just bench press 300 pounds and be like, okay, I'm good, right? Like it is progress. It is slow progress. And like you said, I think that's such a great point. You start with something small, right? And you acknowledge when you do it. So when you make that decision to, cuddle with your daughter rather than go, like you acknowledge, okay, this is a moment where I'm being a good father. Like I'm living in alignment with my values. And it's like a relationship with anyone. What you're really trying to do is build trust with yourself, right? So
I love that. I love it. And
yeah.
how important is that? I love that you did that, because one of my clients this week, we were talking about how things have shifted in his life because he has learned to trust himself more, which is intuition. So I'm curious, how important is it to develop that trust with ourselves?
I think most coaches have a great example to follow, because you talk about how important trust is in your team. Like you need the teammates to trust one another. You need the players to trust the coach's decisions. Like trust is a fundamental element of any championship team, right? So it's easy to understand, or in a relationship, right? With your partner or with your children, it's at play everywhere. But like you said, I think sometimes we overlook the importance of it between our own ears, right? So it is the trust between like our values or our thoughts and our behaviors, right? And creating alignment. And it's built the same way it is in any other relationship. You don't meet someone for the first time and be like, I trust you with my whole heart, right? It's are they showing up consistently? Are they doing what they say they're going to do more often than not? So it is in those daily behaviors. It's like something we start some clients off with is, if they're trying to make a lifestyle change, they need to hydrate more. Okay, make an agreement that every morning when you wake up, you are going to drink 1 glass of water. Can you do that? And when you start small and they do that every day for a week, often what happens is that develops a little bit of an element of trust. I'm showing up for myself. And then you can branch out and maybe add another layer to that commitment or that habit development. But that's the challenge is to start small. And sometimes the irony is the people that need or want to change, the things they're battling are things like perfectionism and people pleasing. And it's hard to overcome that. So when you let yourself down, right, we carry the weight of that and we think we're not good enough more than we should. So really starting small and celebrating the victories along the way. It's like when you're teaching a kid to walk, right? When you teach a child to walk, like as soon as they stand up, you are clapping and you are celebrating that because they are making progress. And when you celebrate it, it encourages them to want to keep working at it, to take the next step and develop. So it's kind of being able to interact with ourselves the same way we do with those we love and we care about their development and growth, which for coaches is usually most of the athletes they work with, right? Can you invest in your own growth and development the same way you do with them?
You know, what I really heard from you again was this simple reminder. This thought just kept coming up, like, can you keep promises that you make to yourself? Right. And those, like you said, these agreements, these little agreements are huge. And keeping promises to yourself is really such a simple idea. And when practiced consistently, like you talk about common confidence, that's where it starts.
Yeah. And one thing I would add is in terms of the motivation to stay committed to those small commitments, it's really important to kind of create that picture for what we want. So again, if I think about it with parenting, like what do I want for my children? What do I want our relationship to look like? What do I want their competencies to be when they're, 10, 15, 20? But having that perspective of what I want the relationship to look like is motivation to stay committed to those small decisions in the moment. Like there's this saying, right? You never think of a good idea when you're being chased by a tiger. So the challenge is sometimes we're motivated because we're trying to get away from something, right? We're trying to not be this way. But that in and of itself is not necessarily enough to stay consistent in our commitment. We're way more likely to be motivated and disciplined if we're clear on what it is that we really want, right? And our pursuit, like we can see it when we close our eyes, we're able to visualize it crystal clear. And the value of that is like our brain can't distinguish between fact and fiction. Like if we close our eyes and we really visualize it, the brain will believe it. So being clear, I think, on what it is you're trying to move towards is really important for the motivation to stay consistent with that commitment, rather than just saying, well, I don't want to be this way. I don't want to do this, so I'm going to do this. You'll find motivation weans more quickly and more easily.
I love that. Again, that great reminder. And again, the power of the mind-body connection, right? The visualization process, right? And how, as we've talked about offline before, this idea that your subconscious does not determine between what's real or imagined. It only knows the here and the now. So the more you create that clear vision of what you're becoming or where you're going, it's funny how things just start to happen a little bit quicker, with greater ease and just, I don't know. I find you start to move away from this hustle and grind. You start to realize it feels a bit more effortless, a bit more in flow.
Absolutely. And like the power of imagery with that as well, right? Because images bypass our conscious mind. Like they speak directly to our subconscious mind. So like that's why when you think of certain instances, like it can work for the benefit or it can hinder us sometimes when we have images of things that we've attributed great meaning to. But even leveraging something like that, like I heard the other day, someone wants to get better at golf. Like even if you consciously watch like a minute of golf a day, that's telling your brain, oh, golf is important to this person because they're taking it in consistently. And then the brain will focus on that. You're more likely to notice things to do with golf, outside in other areas of your life. So another example of that is when you buy a car and then you see that car everywhere, right? Yeah. So like finding ways to leverage imagery, whether it's like a vision board or something that you look at every day that's reminding you of that purpose of like what you want everything to play out like for you, is valuable too.
I love that reminder. it just prompted me to think about a great mentor I had. Says you can only change something that you have a picture of. So again, that part of the mind, it has to be able, right, to actually see something before it can create it. So
yeah. Okay. And the consistency, right? So it's, again, if we think in the world of sports, often teams will sit down at the beginning and they'll set out goals or things they'd like to accomplish or values. And then it's put in a corner somewhere. And then by the end of the year, like maybe half of the people remember what it was. So it's that consistency, right? Like consistent exposure to those things. If you have a vision of what you want your future to look like, or what's important, what your values look like, put it somewhere where you can see it and you can revisit it on a regular basis to be reminding your brain, like, hey, this is what you want for yourself, right?
So I'm curious, one of my biggest purposes is I just love seeing people light up. I love finding out what makes people tick, what drives them, what's on their heart. I'm curious, like, what are you in the process of creating? Like, what's the big vision of, I know it's to empower, right? To empower other people, kind of, I'd love to hear more about what you're doing to help and support people right now.
Yeah. So, oh my goodness, I guess it's a few different folds to it. But again, when I was playing, I loved to impact my teammates. When I was coaching, I loved to work with the players I worked with. And again, like as I get older, that purpose or that reach kind of evolves. So now I'm in a position where I'm really committed to helping coaches kind of leverage their own mental performance, self-awareness in order to, again, have a positive impact on all of those athletes that they're working with. So that's one place where my focus is. And then the other one is on the corporate side, like working with corporate leadership in different businesses, again, to provide them with that support and clarity of values and role so that they can show up for others and maximize that ripple effect in terms of people just living in alignment with their values, right? Like, I think there's been such an uptick in like anxiety and burnout and depression. And for me, just understanding where the roots of a lot of those issues lie and just doing whatever I can to show up for people in order to improve their quality of life. Like that's it for me. So it's taken me in some different directions, but ultimately that's my goal. Is they often say, right, like we're kind of designed to help a younger version of ourselves, right? So I think of myself when I was 25 and I was introduced to this work, and I know the impact that it had on me. And my hope is to help other people have that same experience.
I love everything you're sharing there, MJ. And what it just reminded me is I think what some people fail to recognize sometimes is the anxiety, right? The feelings of anxiousness, the feelings of depression, the feelings of burnout are just a sign and symptom of something that's a little bit deeper. And like you said, it can be something as maybe there's no alignment, right? Or maybe there's unclear values, right? About clarity around your values. And so I just love how you're really getting at the root in order so that people, like you said, can live the quality of life that they want, they desire, and that they truly deserve. So I love that. Okay.
Absolutely. Well, that's the thing, right? Life is a gift, and my hope is that people do enjoy it for what it is. And if I can help people do that, then that's great.
Okay. So how can people start to follow you? Again, I know for me, I always love seeing when you're posting stuff because you always challenge me to stop, think, reflect. And I know I've shared that with you countless times. Yeah. What's the best way people can follow you, support you, maybe learn more about what you're up to? Yeah.
So 2 ways. I mean, one place you'll find me is on Instagram. So Coach Life 2.0. So you can find me there. That's where I kind of share a lot of athlete coach specific content. Mm-hmm. If you wanted to email me, my email address is coachlife2.0@gmail.com. It's the number 2, the word point, and the number 0 @gmail.com. And then the other place is LinkedIn. You can find me on there, MJ Jennings. I'm always open for messages. If you'd like to have a conversation about anything we've discussed, I'm happy to do so. And if you're interested in any of the mental performance training, you can also head to our company's website, which is www.elitehighperformance.com.
And I'll be sure to share all those links in the description of the podcast on YouTube and on Facebook. So MJ, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge you. I want to take a moment to acknowledge you for the amazing, partner you are, the amazing mom, coach, teacher, mentor, but more importantly, the amazing human being you are. The one thing I've really come to appreciate as we've gotten to know each other is how you really do live by your core values, right? Like you are one of the most genuine people. You always challenge me in a loving way to stop and think and reflect on how I'm showing up in the world. So I just want to thank you for being a shining light for me and others in this beautiful world.
Thank you so much. And thank you for, this opportunity to have this conversation. And honestly, right back at you, you are someone who certainly fills my cup every time that we connect. You are very genuine, you are sincere, and I have no doubt that your impact is only going to continue to grow.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'm going to practice receiving that. So thank you.
Yeah, right. That's right. That's right.
So as I remind you every time in the huddle, knowledge is potential power. It's the consistent and focused application of great knowledge that actually creates great results. MJ shared so many valuable nuggets of wisdom that you can apply not only in sport, but in the game of life. So my challenge to you is to take one of these valuable nuggets of wisdom and go apply it to your life today. And as I remind you every week in the huddle, you are deserving of greatness. You are worthy of greatness. You are greatness. And my ask for these conversations is quite simple. If this conversation has resonated with you, share it with someone important in your life. Share it with a loved one. Share it with someone that can be inspired, empowered by hearing these simple ideas. Because the more people we have that understand, that are aware of these ideas, that are applying them to their life, the brighter this world's going to shine. And that's what this life's all about. It's about helping and serving others. So as always, I look forward to having a conversation with you next time in the huddle. Have a blessed rest of your day.